Hi. In this video, I'll show you how you can create dynamic Django forms without having to write any JavaScript. I'll be doing this by combining Django with a small library called htmx. Let's begin with a motivating example so you can understand the problem that we're solving here. I'd like to show you some of the downsides of using HTML forms. So here's a long article, and at the bottom of the article we have a subscribe form where you give your full name and email. And so this is all fine so far, and the user might fill out their name and forget to put their email in. And so what we get is a full page reload where we've gone back to the top of the page and the user has to scroll back down to the bottom to see that the email field is required. So they put their name in again, they put their email in, and they screw it up, they click contact us, and they end up back at the top of the page and they have to scroll back down, find the error message, put their name back in, submit, and they go back to the top of the page because we've had a full page reload, and then they finally, if they can be bothered, go back and see that their request has been submitted. And so this isn't a very nice experience for the user. So what I want to show you is a way to create forms like this where users can fill them out and get feedback from the backend without a full page reload, where you don't have to write any JavaScript, where it's all Python and HTML that you have to do. And I'll just show you an example of this. So the user submits this form with nothing in it, and they get these error messages without a full page reload. They put in just their name, and they get a new error message. They put in their name and a bad email, and they get the email validation, and they can successfully submit the form, and they get quick feedback without the page sort of flashing them back up to the top. And once again, this is all possible without any JavaScript that you have to write. So you might be wondering, how do I create these interactive web pages using Django and no JavaScript? And the way you can do that is with this really nifty tool called htmx. I know the way I'm saying that might be confusing, so here it is spelled out for you, htmx. And I think the conceit of the name is that it's extended HTML, and it's described as high-power tools for HTML. So this is a JavaScript library, but the way that the library functions is that you essentially just load it, and then the way that you use it is by annotating your HTML with these attributes rather than writing JavaScript directly. So when you use this library, there is JavaScript running under the hood, but you don't need to interact with it very much, meaning you don't have to use a framework like React or Vue to create interactive web pages or deal with manipulating the DOM directly with vanilla JavaScript, which I've found to be really nice and has saved me a lot of time and effort in my own web development. So I hope you find this useful. For the rest of this video, I'll show you how to use htmx to achieve the results that I've just shown you. Before I start showing you any code, I just want to show you that it's all available on GitHub, so you can look at all of the code that I'm working with in this tutorial if you go to this GitHub address here, and I'll have a link in the video and on my blog. And there are two branches which you might find interesting. There's this one and this one. So the first one is the project which doesn't have any HTMX. It's the project at the start where there is no JavaScript. It's all just pure Django, you could say. And so you can look at that here and have a poke around the files. And there's this other branch, htmx form, which is the end of the tutorial, which has all the functioning htmx code, which you can have a look at and play around with. In addition, there's also these setup instructions. So if you clone this repository using Git onto your computer, assuming you've got Python 3 and pip, you should be able to run this and have a play around with it yourself on your computer. For starters, I'm going to show you the project with no HTMX code. It's only going to be sort of vanilla Django, which is using Django forms and models and views and no JavaScript or anything like that. And then once I've given you a tour of the code, I'm going to show you how to add the htmx, and then you'll be able to see the final product at the end. And so the reason for that is that progression is I want you to understand all the Django code first, and then after you understand that, you can just see the extra htmx bits in isolation. So let's take a look at the before code by checking out this branch. See that we switch branches. And now I'm just going to start up the Django application server by going into the app folder and running the run server management command. Right, you can see it's running, and you can see it's being served on localhost 8000. Right, and you can submit this contact form, and you'll be able to see the results come up in the Django admin as well. So let's do a test one. Let's say testy test with the email test@test.com. And you can see that worked, and it turned up in the admin, and that it turned up in the SQLite database right there. So I'm just going to take you through how that all is set up. If you're familiar with Django, this might already be pretty obvious to you, but just in case, I'll give you a quick tour. So this is the root of the project, and there's an app folder that I've created which contains all of the Django bits. The name is pretty arbitrary. I've named my project demo, so there's this demo app here which contains all the project settings and the root URLs and all that crap. And this web project has all of the this web app has all of the stuff specific to the actual web page that you see. Let's start with the model. So there's a contact model which has a name and an email, which you can see reflected in the Django admin. And this contact model is the incoming data from the web page is validated using a form. And this is the form, so it uses model form, which means that we don't have to write a lot of code. We just tell it to use this model and to validate these fields. And all of this is tied together by this index view, which can take a GET and a POST request. And this view is hooked up via URLs to the root path. And so if someone just visits the root path, which is, just this or this, if it's a GET request, we'll create the contact form, but with no data inside it, and we'll pass it to be rendered by as index HTML. So we'll send them the HTML. Or if it's a POST request, we will create the form using the posted data, validate it. If it's valid, save it, and send a success message. And I think the final thing I need to show you is the actual template, which just is a bunch of static HTML, and then this form. So I've just hand coded this form because it was just easy, and it'll also be important for later when we add the htmx stuff. You'll need to do some custom stuff with this HTML. Just walking through this, the action of the form is going to target the index view. So when this form gets posted using the post method, it's going to send the request to this URL, which happens to be the same URL as the sort of the loading the page view. What I mean by that is, and this will be important later, it's why I'm sort of dragging this out. So when we just load this page, you can see that we make a, So when we load the page, you can see that we make a GET request to this URL, and what we receive as a response is all of the HTML. And let's see, what we actually send in a request is a bunch of headers, and that's it. Whereas when we then submit the form, and so when all of this happened, by the way, it ran through this code path. It invoked this view with our request. It skipped this because it's a GET request, not a POST request. It constructed the form and then rendered all of this HTML and sent it to us. And then we can see the HTML blah, 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 right here. Cool. So far so good. And we get the form. And then the next step is we fill out the form and we send that. All right. And did it reload? Where's my post request? Did I just, oh, there it is. Yep. Okay, so then when we submitted the form and when we clicked the Contact Us button, it sent a post request. And it sent some headers, but it also sent this form data with the CSRF token and the name and the email. And so that then used this code path because the method was post. It constructed the form with the request post data, which is the name and email. It validated it. It was valid. It saved the form to the database, or it used the form to save the model to the database and then sent back a success message. And in this case, we know it worked because it's displayed the success message, and also because we can see it in the Django admin and also in the database directly if we want to. So something to note when looking at this post request is that if we look at the response that's sent after we submit this form and it completely reloads the page, is that the view, which in this case is this view, it executes this code and then returns some HTML. And that HTML, if we look at the response, is the entire page being re-rendered. And this is an important thing to note because we'll be doing it a bit differently when we start using htmx. All right, so that is how all that works. Finally, I think for this form, so the form post URL is the same as the get URL for the page. It uses the post method. This is just some CSS stuff to make it pretty. We need to include the CSRF token to make sure that basically that Django's security middleware is happy. And then here's the input field for the name, the input field for the email, a button that submits the form, and then just some stuff for displaying error messages. That's all this stuff. And that is the whole form. And this is nice because it doesn't need any JavaScript. You can just whack this in HTML and it works, which is wonderful. Okay, so that's all of the code for making the page to work without any JavaScript, without any HTMX either. And next I'll show you how to add HTMX to make this a little more dynamic, to prevent the problem where if we fill out the name and the email, it doesn't do that thing where it completely reloads the whole page. So what I've just shown you is that the browser makes a GET request to this path, just the root path, and that sends that GET request to the index view, which then returns a web page in the form of a big block of HTML. And then when the user fills out the form and submits the form, the browser sends a post request to the root path, which hits the index view with a post request, and then the index view returns the entire page's worth of HTML like this, which the browser then re-renders. What we're going to do differently now looks like this. The start looks the same. The browser will send a GET request to the root path to load the page, and that'll hit the index view with a GET request. The index view will then render the entire page in HTML, which will be sent to the browser and then sort of drawn on the screen for you. But when you submit the form, something different will happen. In this case, what will happen is it will send a post request to a new endpoint called contact. This will hit a new view, which we're going to make, called the contact view with a post request. The contact view will then return only the new changed HTML of the form. So you can see it's only the bit that's changed, not, as we saw before, the entire page. And so this small amount of HTML will be sent back to the browser, and the htmx JavaScript library will do some magic to swap this with this. And so what the user will see is they'll click submit or contact us, whatever it was, and then this will happen, and then htmx, the JavaScript library, which we'll install shortly, we'll swap it out with this. And from the user's perspective, it'll be a sort of dynamic, more seamless experience. Now I'll show you how to do that in the Django code. So the first thing I want to show you is how to just break this single index HTML template up into a template and a form fragment. I'll show you what I mean by that. So we've got all this text and then the form in here. And so as I showed you before, we want to render this form as a part of the main page, but also just independently. And so to do that, we're going to break it up into a fragment. So I'm going to create a new folder in my templates and call it htmx. I'll try to do that right now. htmx. You can call it whatever you want, though, it doesn't matter. And I'm going to create a fragment called contact form. And I'm just going to copy and paste just the form element into here. And where the form was, I'm going to plop in a just a little bit of Django template language stuff, this include, which says to basically replace this tag with the HTML contained in here. So let's give that a try. I'll save that. And let's try reloading our page. No, I don't want to do that. As you can see, nothing's changed. It all just works the same from the user's perspective. And this is just a bit of refactoring that we've done so far. Cool. So the next step is to split this view up into 2 bits. And so this is pretty easy to do. I'm going to create the index view, and that'll just be get only. Get rid of the post bit. That's pretty easy. And then we'll call this the contact view. And this will be post only. And we can get rid of this bit. Right. In this case, both will return the full web page so far. And so let's just test this out. I'll add the contact view in as a path. Contact. Okay, we're nearly there. And then I'll need to update the form to send the post request to the contact view, not the index view. All right, let's give that a go, see what happens. So it should work, but it will get a bit weird because what's going to happen is we're going to load the, no, I don't want to confirm that. We'll load the index view, we'll put in our name, put in our email. This will send a post request to the contact view, which will then reload the HTML, but we'll go from here to, which is not the final result that we want. I just want to show you where we're at right now. Cool. That works. Of course, that's not desirable at all because we don't want to go to a page called contact. We want to stay on this page. Sweet. What is next? So we don't want to return the whole web page from the contact view. You can see from this diagram I made that we want to just return this form, which should be pretty straightforward because it's now in its own template. And so we can use that template instead of this template. We'll just swap it over from web index to web htmx contact form. And let's try it out now. So we're getting closer and closer to our final goal. I'll load the page and it loads, which is nice. We can fill out the form. Now. And so this will send a post request to the contact view, which will then just return only this form, which isn't so great yet, but we're on the way to sort of achieving our goal. And I'll just show you the how that actually looks from the network tab. If you want to access this tab, by the way, just start in Chrome and press Control-Shift-I, and you should end up with this. You click on network, and then when I submit the form, you can see we hit contact, and what we get back is only the HTML of the form, which is what we want to see. Cool. So now comes the actual bit of adding htmx. So this is it. It's the a little JavaScript library, which I think is really fantastic. And we're just going to include it by following the instructions and loading it from Unpackaged, which is an externally hosted website. You can also just visit this link and download it yourself if you want. You can copy paste this. But just for simplicity, I'm just going to whack it in at the end of my body tag, like that. Cool. And we should be able to see it loading successfully. Look at the network. There you go. You can see we got all of this JavaScript, which is been minified, so you can't read it. So we've successfully loaded htmx, but it's not doing anything yet. And so the way htmx works is that you take HTML elements and you annotate them with these attributes that start with hx. So for example, in this basic example, when you click this button, it will send a post request to the endpoint /clicked, and it will swap out the HTML with the response. And so we're going to be using hx post, the attribute, and the attribute hx swap to do this. And I'll show you this in practice in a second. Just for a reference, there is a big list on the htmx website under reference where you can read about all the things that you can do and what they all mean. So we'll be using this hx post to tell htmx where to send the request, and then hx swap to tell it how to swap out the HTML. So let's start with... Okay, so I'll show you how to add this htmx attribute now. We're going to get rid of this action and method section on the form and replace it with hx post, which tells htmx to on click to send a post request to the contact URL. So let's give that a try and see how it goes. So you can see it's swapped out with no page reload, which is nice. That's the sort of dynamic experience we wanted. And we can also try this, and it gives us the error message that we want, which is cool. And if we have a look at the sort of response data being sent back, you can see it's just the form. And what's nice is that the htmx works the second and third time around. So you can see that we can continue to send this over and over again. It's not just a one-off thing. There is one problem though. So every time I click this contact us button, a disturbing thing happens, and I'll show you in the HTML. So you can see what we initially had was one form, but every time we post and get the response back, it actually puts a form inside the form, and we end up with this horrible nested structure. So if I do it again, it'll add another one. And if your form is styled as well, it looks pretty bad. You can get some sort of ugly side effects. And so to avoid this, you want to use hx swap to tell htmx how to replace the HTML. So I think the default is the inner HTML swap behavior, and what we want is outer HTML. So it swaps out the it sort of replaces this top level element and not just inserts the results inside. And so that's pretty easy to do though. You just add in hx swap out of HTML, and let's try it again. So now when I click this, I can click it a bunch of times. I can successfully submit it. And if you look at this, you can see the form's being replaced without, infinitely nesting it. And so we're nearly done here. this works. One more thing I want to show you, which is a cool little trick I saw from a Matt Lehman article that I read on htmx, was that he managed to avoid having to put the CSRF token in every form when you're using htmx, which isn't a big deal, but you know, it's sort of nice to avoid repetition where you can. So we can take this out and instead just put this little script in, which is a nice little trick that I thought was cool to share. Thanks to Matt Lehman for sharing it with me. There you go. So this is a little script that runs after htmx has been loaded, and it tells basically tells htmx to configure itself. And so it'll send this request, and you will tell it to add this header that includes the CSRF token, which Django recognizes. It reads this header to look for the CSRF token and to replace it with the CSRF token. And this is nice because you can just add it once into your body, and it means you don't have to do it in every single form that you add. Right, so there you go. We've now updated our form to use htmx instead of sort of just vanilla Django, with the benefit that now when users submit it, they don't need to reload the page and they get immediate feedback. It feels a lot more dynamic and sort of obvious what's going on. Anyway, I hope you found this helpful. And yeah, I encourage you to check out the code on GitHub and play around with it. And I also encourage you to have a look at the htmx documentation. It's pretty good, it's pretty readable, and this reference is quite good. And they also have quite a few examples, which you might find helpful. All right, that's it. Hope you enjoyed it. See you later.